Hey, happy Heat Pump podcast hearers, listeners. Welcome back. Bean and I are going to have another conversation. Today, we thought we would focus on, I suppose it's a sort of cultural, economic question. Why are heat pump sales in the UK so much lower than pretty well everywhere else, advanced industrial economies? We are definitely the laggard. Bean, I am fascinated in this because we're not laggards when it comes to electric vehicles. In fact, the UK is the leading European market for electric vehicles. So it's not like we don't want to spend more on the green one because electric vehicles are expensive. It's not that we don't like net zero.
Well, do we like net zero? I think there is this thing about net zero. You know, we were talking about this on Fair, net zero green becoming a bit devalued in some people's minds. And I think the electric vehicle comparison is an interesting one because that industry is now selling electric vehicles not on the basis that they're saving the planet. They're being sold on the basis that they're better cars, a better driving experience. And I think that there's a lesson for our industry in that.
Well, okay. I mean, let me just give you some data, which actually you've given me, but I actually had data of my own as well. Okay, so this is heat pump market shares as a percentage of heat pumps and boilers. Basically, take the sort of big heating things people put in their homes. I'm looking at this graph on my laptop here. UK, 4%. These are 2023 sales. So it's the new sales. UK, 4%. So 1 in 25 new heating installations is a heat pump. Norway, 98%. So basically full market in Norway. Sweden, 94. Finland, 94. Clearly from that, it's not because we're a cold country that we don't have heat pumps.
Not at all.
I mean, they're much colder than we are.
It's nothing to do with climatic conditions.
Let's go to our nearest and dearest, most similar country, France, 50%. So basically, it's actually 51%. So slight majority of new heating installations in France, heat pumps.
Is that new?
This is new. These are sales. Now, you can go to this
overall sales, so new build and retrofit.
I see what you mean. I would imagine so. So it's space heating.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if it's 4% over here overall, to be honest, because we're selling 1.6 million boilers a year. And at the moment, we're doing 70, 80,000 heat pumps. That's not 4%.
That is 4%, isn't it?
Is it?
Well, 160,000 is 10%.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I think we should.
Yeah, maybe.
No, I think it's good. No, 160. 10% of 1.6 million is 160,000.
Yeah, that's perfect.
5% is 80,000. 4% would be a bit.
Yeah, that staggers me actually. But anyway, sorry.
Okay,
sorry.
Well, but look, 4% is very, very low.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think isn't the basic reason why they've not caught on in the UK that our gas prices are relatively good and pretty well everyone is connected to a grid with natural gas. And electricity prices are high.
Yeah, we've had ongoing policy from multiple governments that have sought to drive down the price of gas at the expense of electricity. So all the policy costs in the last 20 odd years of any changes to electricity, any subsidies, anything like that, they've all been piled on electricity, which, to be fair, when electricity was still being predominantly generated by coal, and therefore was the dirtiest fuel we had, you would say that's great. We're putting all of the levies on the dirtiest fuel, the polluter pays. What we didn't have is a mechanism that as that coal was removed and the electricity grid cleaned up, that we progressively migrated those costs across to what is now the dirtiest fuel. And now we've left in this perverse situation where if you want people to give up smoking, you say, we're going to give you 50 Marlboro a day for free in order to encourage you to give up smoking. Because that's where we're at.
That's the gas, isn't it? The low. I mean, we do intervene in the market for renewable energy in ways that benefit the renewable.
But the numbers around the subsidies to the food, oil and gas industry globally are staggering, are they not?
Because
you'll know this better than me.
They're not paying. I mean, we don't subsidize North Sea gas. We tax it very highly. in the north, whereas it comes out of the North Sea. But I think that must be something to do with why the British might. We just have a great gas grid, don't we?
We have a really good gas grid. You're quite right. Our gas grid is heavily invested, of course, largely built at public expense. And we've kept gas prices low. The interesting thing, I think, is that, look, the North Sea, let's assume that the benefits of North Sea oil and gas were sort of roughly split between us and Norway. Not quite that simple, I know. The Norwegians didn't let their population burn any of it. They sold the whole lot to other people, pocketed the cash, put it in their sovereign wealth fund, and they now own something like 4% of globally traded stock, and there's about 5 million of it.
I mean,
We have no legacy at all.
Well, we
as a result of North Sea oil and gas.
that is a big conversation. Norway had the same amount of oil and gas spread between a very much smaller number of people, so the profits per head were much higher. So it was easier to put them aside. We just
But what's our legacy from North Sea oil and gas?
It was that we'd kept our national debt down. Obviously now we've let it go up again. But look, that's a whole different conversation. The truth is, gas, I think, does explain part of the difference between the UK, other countries. Being cold doesn't explain it. That's what some people say. Oh, it's too cold to have heat pumps. No, that can't explain it because they're very big in Norway, Sweden, Finland. These are all the coldest places. There is something else, though, that I think is explained. Well, you guess what I'm about to say. What's the other thing that might explain it?
Well, I think there's a cultural piece about the UK wanting to use wet systems, so hydronic heat pumps. And of course, a lot of the sales you're referring to around Europe are actually air-to-air heat pumps. So France, Scandinavia, there's a lot of air-to-air systems there. And over here, I always sense that there's a bit of a slight snobbishness about blown air.
Yeah.
That's for offices, that's for shops.
It's
not for our homes. This is not, we want passive heat in our homes. And I think that's a contributory factor.
I think there is that cultural thing. We know what we know about radiators. That's what we do.
We think we know about
and yeah, we don't, but we think we know about radiators. That's how we heat.
And even calling them radiators, of course, is wrong.
Why is that?
Because they're convectors. Most of the heat is not radiated, it's convected.
But anyway, so we're a sort of water radiator culture. That's part of it. No, the thing I was going to say is that our houses are not very well insulated. And I think that does put people off heat pumps. Because the heat traditionally comes in more slowly from a heat pump. I know you're saying that it doesn't. It does. It comes in more slowly from a heat pump. And if you're losing heat, you can be in a situation where you're losing it as quickly as you're putting it in. So it does work better with a nicely insulated property.
I wouldn't say it works better. I would say that a nicely insulated property requires less energy to heat it. It doesn't matter where it comes from.
Correct.
Because the building has no idea where the heat's coming from.
Correct. But if it is nicely insulated, the speed at which you can control temperature flows, for example.
We talked about flow temperatures previously.
Yeah.
You know, you've talked about 55 degrees and condensing boilers. So we've had this debate, and that's part of the problem. And there are a whole load of people who are sort of culpable in this. But you have to question how we managed to arrive at a situation where building regulations requires us to install condensing gas boilers and then fails to require them to be commissioned such that they spend their time in condensing mode.
Right. No, I mean, that is a very strange one. So, and you have explained before that if you have it too high a temperature, flow temperature, you're not getting any of the efficiency benefits out of that particular
Getting less
design and boiler. Yeah. No, that. But look, I think the cultural thing. The
capital cost is an issue too.
Pricing of gas. Well, it's the same capital cost in these other countries. They're not.
Yeah, but interestingly, if you look at the average costs that are being paid by homeowners in Germany, for example, on their heating systems, they are culturally predisposed to spend more on their heating systems than we do over here. And I suspect that reflects across quite a lot of Scandinavia and the countries that are that much more advanced. So they have traditionally always invested more in their heating systems than we have.
They think of it as a sort of a bigger piece of their capital stock.
So it's a bigger piece of investment, and as a result, they have better longevity from their systems. So they're refreshing them less often, And that's something which I think is not that well understood in terms of the comparison between heat pumps and boilers. And in fact, the discussion around capital costs we need to continuously bang on about it's not the cost of the heat pump that's 12,000.
No, the adjustment.
It's a transition that comes with that one-off cost. And it's really important to make that distinction because people think, I imagine that in their minds, they think, gosh, every time I have to replace this unit, it's going to cost me another £12,000. It is.
No, much less, much less. So we've had culture, we've had pricing of energy and availability of gas. I mean, the grid is a very, very, really post-North Sea, isn't it, the grid? We've had not the fact that it's cold, but maybe the housing stock has put people off heat pumps here. I think the biggest other thing, really big, is that you get tipping points in these things. So once you've got a bit of an industry, you get the ecosystem around the installation, which is the servicing, the salespeople who know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And basically, you get an industry or you don't. It's never taken off, or it hasn't yet taken off here. And that's what needs to happen if people are going to have heat pumps.
You're right. I mean, people talk about, the tipping point in sales or the S-curve or whatever, however you decide.
That's it. It starts slow, very quick, and then when everyone's got one, it flattens out. The S-curve.
And interestingly, I think that whatever you touched on was partly in the discussion we had last time around about servicing. So that's engendered quite a lot of conversation with consumers coming to us at the Heat Pump Federation and saying, I'm struggling to find a service agent that's reasonably close and therefore reasonably affordable. And I think that's part of it. Although, very interestingly, we are now beginning to see specialist service companies set up. So they're not doing installations at all. They're just doing service and maintenance. And actually, I learned of 2 new ones only in the last couple of weeks.
Okay, very good. Now, interestingly, I think the US sells more heat pumps than gas boilers now as well, gas furnaces as they call them.
A lot more cooling requirement over there, of course. So where you've got cooling and heating requirements, heat pump technology really comes into its own because you're doing both with the same device. And I think that is now starting to be reflected in some of the sales rise we're seeing in air-to-air over here, in that people are putting in air-to-air systems, air conditioning, as they might refer to them as, in order to get some cooling because we're getting slightly warmer periods in parts of the year, summer. I'm not sure we get the demarcation we used to have between summer, winter, and what have you. But so they're putting that in, and then they're realizing that having got a facility to cool the main sitting area and maybe a bedroom for making sleeping more comfortable, they're now realizing that they can use that same device in the early couple of weeks of the heating season and then the last few weeks of the heating season. So instead of putting the central heating on and running the whole house, they're just doing the areas that they're in and using the same device. That is beginning to take hold, I think. And when we short do a
thing on air-to-air, room by room,
it's rising up the scale. Nesta are doing some research on it. The Energy Systems Catapult have just released a paper on it.
Yeah. Well,
I talk about it, government again as you are thinking about including it in some sort of subsidy scheme.
And then you can take the radiators away and put your bookcases there. Anyway, it is interesting. Because the British are not slow adopters to things like electric vehicles. They're not slow adopters to using ChatGPT. We were fast on mobile phones, faster than the others.
Yeah, it is.
We have not taken to heat pumps.
And we're also a nation of sort of inventors too. And, we're sort of, historically, we've been forward. You think about the Industrial Revolution and all those sorts of things. So it is a strange phenomenon that we're not yet taking to...
S-curve analysis does sort of say that the adoption often goes slowly, then fast, then slowly. So maybe that
Yeah, how say
maybe it won't. Maybe we'll just carry on using gas. There are listeners we have who believe that is the right way to do it.
The reflection on this is, everything takes longer than you think to get going. And once it gets going, it goes faster than you thought it ever would.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, we had a comment on the one on what alternatives are there to heat pumps. I think the title meant in a net zero world, obviously, and someone did answer, alternative gas boilers, you're welcome. And I I mean, there is a lot of that. Let's just stick with the gas.
There is, but we've got to remember that ultimately fossil fuels are a finite resource. I know when people say we're going to keep finding more. Someone was talking to me about massive shale deposits under Sheffield, for example, a few days ago. But the shale reserves over here are not like the shale reserves in the States.
They're only Sheffield, not in massive tracts of empty Texas.
Exactly that. And if you were to create minor earthquakes and methane in the drinking water in Liverpool and Sheffield, you would be in trouble. So it's a very, very different scenario between here and the States. So I think people do have to remember this is a finite resource, and actually there are some things that we will need oil and gas for that would be much, much more difficult to displace. Heating our homes is not one of them. And
heating and driving we can do with electricity if we want. We can. And flying aeroplanes is much more difficult if you're flying airborne.
That is one of the debates we've had about liquid fuels, so biofuels, liquid biofuels, that industries like flight and others will ultimately be prepared to pay a premium for the fuel because they've got no choice, which homeowners won't be prepared to pay. And so that will tend to drive the market too, I think, won't it?
All right. Well, look, dear listener, you may have your own theories as to why the Brits are being a little bit reluctant when it comes to heat pumps. Let us know your thoughts. It's got to be something that explains a difference between the UK and, say, France or Norway. Not something that's the same everywhere. So we'd like your theories. We do read your comments. Leave them on whatever platform you're viewing or listening to us on: YouTube, Spotify, Apple. We're on all of those. And you can always email us at happyheatpumppod@gmail.com. Join us next time.